welcome in. It is Big Ten Today on this Friday. We are brought to you by Gatorade. It is great to have you with us. Dave Revson, Bruce Weber, and as promised, Fred Hoiberg in studio. I mean, I just want to say, Collins lives, 10 miles from here? We try to get him on the show, and it's got to be Zoom. I mean, coming all the way from Lincoln just for this.
Just for this, yes.
That was really,
I'm honored you guys asked me. I got the first plane out. Yeah, no, I'm actually staying about a mile from here. So my daughter, who worked for the Big Ten Network for about 5 years, had the time of her life here. She just started a new opportunity a couple months ago, but we're staying really close to her, and yeah, it just worked out great. We came in, our whole family's here. So our son Jack, who played for Coach Izzo at Michigan State for 4 seasons, he's in town working for the San Antonio Spurs. They played the Bulls last night, so it just worked out great. We haven't been together as a family in over a year, so it just gave us a great opportunity to be together.
Well, we appreciate that you took some time away from the family time, although Sam is just off camera here, one of the key players on your Nebraska team right now, but appreciate that you took the time to come in here, and you better believe if you come into studio, your team is going to be the big story. And so let's start with Nebraska, off to a great start, 10-2 in the league, including a conference win over Michigan State, 3 straight victories for them after dropping 2 in a row. It includes a tremendous victory at Kansas State, ended a 5-game skid in Manhattan, first win there since 2006. Coach, let's talk about this team. It's been pretty exciting to watch the way that you have started. Mike DeCourcy's newest bracket came out this morning. Nebraska would be in the field as of today, according to him. What are you most pleased with this team so far?
I think the thing I'm most pleased is the resiliency of this group. It's a very mature group. We have the oldest team in the Big Ten this season, and we did have a tough week where Creighton handed it to us. They had an unbelievable shooting night. They're tough to turn off when they have that type of shooting performance, and then bounced that back, had a great first half, maybe as good at 20 minutes as we played all year in our first conference game on the road at Minnesota. And then they just completely dominated us in that second half and outscored us by over 20 points and kind of ran away with that game. But when we went into that film room that next morning, you could see it was a very dejected locker room after that game. And we needed to turn the tides, and we needed to get over that game quickly. We had 2 days to prepare for a very talented Michigan State team. So, what I saw in practice those 2 days, we had a great film session, about an hour long, and, had some pretty tough conversations in that room. Coach, you know how that is. I mean, you really have to go in there and be honest with yourselves about where things are. And we were just getting dominated on the glass in those 2 games. So, to go out and have 2 really tough physical practices, and I read some of Coach Izzo's quotes of, I'm going to get back to the football pads. So they had just gotten beat by Wisconsin. So we knew it was going to be a battle. And when you play a Michigan State team, it's transition and it's rebounding, and you have to match physicality. And that's what we did, and we overcame adversity. They took a lead on us with under 3 to go, and then we made all the right plays down the stretch. We didn't panic. I saw guys in the huddles talking to each other. That makes our job so much easier, and that really carried over into that game to get that huge win to level at 1-1 in league play. And then we bounced back with maybe our most complete 40-minute performance on the road in a very tough environment. Coach, you were there for a lot of years. We had some great battles back in the old Big 12 days. But to get that big win on the road and to have 22 offensive rebounds. Juwan Gary had 11 offensive rebounds in that game. Rink Mass goes for 19 and 12 and got a huge win on the road in a very tough environment. So I like where our team is. But again, I guess to answer your question, Dave, the biggest thing that I've liked is it's a very mature, resilient group, and the way that we prepared going into those 2 games was something I'm really pleased with.
I wanted to ask, last year I went up against you. I always said you were one of the best offensive gurus that we had to go against. And at Iowa State, you scored so many points. Tried that at Nebraska a little bit, and then last year you just changed your whole style. And I gave you credit. I mean, that's, Coach Katie always taught me, if you want to stay in the business, you got to be flexible. You got to change with the times and your talent. And you did that. And now, Creighton, you got going up a little bit too fast probably, but for the most part, you've controlled the tempo and you've done a great job on defense.
Yeah, and going back to that Creighton game, it was the beginning of the second half, and we did try to go, it was 1 pass shot, and you can't do that against Creighton, especially when they get rolling. And I thought we panicked a little bit. Since then, we talked about still playing with pace, but playing with smart pace. And if you don't have something, get the ball in the half court and execute your set. We've done a much better job, and I think the perfect example of that is shooting 65% in the second half against Michigan State. Nobody had shot 50%, or nobody has shot 50% over the course of the season, except for that one game. And we got the ball where we needed it. We got it to the elbow. We were really good cutting. Rink Mass made some terrific plays to our cutters to get some plays at the rim. But you look at last year's team, and the thing I was really pleased, I'll forever be grateful, Sam Griesel, Emmanuel Bandamel, Derek Walker, those three guys really set the tone as far as their leadership and really setting the culture where it needed to be. And when you looked early in our schedule last year, we were a top 30 defensive team. And, we struggled to score at times, but our identity was a tough, gritty, defensive-minded team. And when we had our starters healthy, we were 7-3 and had a really tough play against Purdue in overtime, where if we don't have that call, we might have been 8-2, and I think on our way to an NCAA tournament berth. And then we had the two season-ending injuries to Emmanuel and to Jawan Gary. But I give credit. Sam came in from the scout team and played a major role in that team, and Jamarcus Lawrence, who was in and out of the lineup. So you got two freshmen that were out there, and we ended up with the best record in the Big Ten that last month of the season. And that helped carry over to help us get a Rink Mass, to Bryce Williams, the transfers that we ended up getting, Josiah Alec, Jerron Coleman. It just gave us the opportunity, because I think in watching how we played and really kind of flipping the identity from being that tough defensive team to all of a sudden having to shift. And then Casey, what he did those last 6 weeks of the season was phenomenal. And, we had to put in a couple zones to steal some possessions. But offensively, we were really, really talented at the end of the last season. But if you don't have a culture in place, when you have that type of adversity, you're not going to handle it well. But our guys did a great job flipping it, and, that's carried over into this season. And again, I think Griesel, Bandamel, and Walker get a lot of credit for that.
I do want to ask you about the transfers this year, and it feels like every one of them has fit incredibly well. Rink Mass, to me, is the headliner. He's so much fun to watch play. He fits perfectly what you're doing, all the stuff you talk about, like the way he distributes from the elbow. He's a good, tough rebounder. He can stretch a defense and shoot the three. I know he's out for a brief period here. He had a knee scope, but just give us a sense of kind of what he has done for you offensively.
Yeah, he's the perfect fit for the spread offense. And when you look at the K-State game, they really had their pressure amped up early in that game and turned us over a couple times and got out to a lead. I think it was 7-0. And then Rink comes down and hits 3 threes in a row at the 5 spot. And now you get the big away from the basket. And we had a player, who's played against coaches' teams, and George Niang, when you put him in the spread spot, you're going to get the 5s away from the rim. And then that opens up the cutting and all that type of thing. And that's where I think Rink, he and I have watched some film on this. When we have our cutting going on, it's important to be patient. Instead of going right into a dribble handoff as a cut, you got to let that develop and maybe get a late pass at the basket. That's where Casey had such a good chemistry last year with Derek Walker, and they're starting to figure that out this year. And the Michigan State game, I think, was a good example of that. But yeah, he really has fit in well, and we're very lucky to have him.
Help me understand really quickly, like a kid like that goes into the portal. Like, did you know about him beforehand? Because he seems like such a perfect fit. Like, he's exactly the right guy. Like, how is that working in this day and age?
Well, it's a great question. And it's become right when that season ends. I mean, back in the old days, we used to be able to get away and have a nice little break and recharge. Now it's our busiest time of year. And you're constantly looking at the portal and which guys fit into your system and fit into your program in all areas, not just on the court, but off the court. Are they the right guys, to continue on with the culture? But when Rink went in, yeah, absolutely. We were on the phone with him that first day. We were seeing him. We flew to Peoria to go see him, got him on a visit. We're very fortunate that he committed to us a couple days after.
What about Casey? I mean, superstar last year, as you talked about the last part of the season. Did you see that in him? And then you talked also, I always said last year, he made the threes, but he also got the layups off the cutting, and that always seemed to get him going.
Yeah, and I think one of the most impressive stats with Casey last year, he was second in the Big Ten in 2-point field goal percentage behind Pharrell Payne at Minnesota, ahead of Zach Edey, ahead of Hunter Dickinson, ahead of Trace Jackson Davis. I mean, he just had such an ability to get into the paint, and he was a tremendous finisher. And then that set up everything on the three. So now you have to worry about the cuts, and that's going to open up because he only needs a sliver of space to get that shot off. He hasn't shot the ball as well to this point, but it's coming. I mean, he's too good of a shooter. I think he's shooting 34% from the three-point line, averaging about 14 a game. What I looked at last year, he played so well on the international stage, and he did the same thing this year. He was one of 3 NCAA tournament players playing in the World Cup, which was in his home country in Okinawa in Japan. And he was really responsible. It was the first time they ever beat a European team. They beat Finland with Markkanen, really good team. And then they win their last game to qualify for the Olympics. In case it was as big a part of that as anybody. He is such a confident kid. He's got an infectious personality. He's always got a smile on his face. I mean, he'll flip off a crowd. I mean, he's a guy. When you go into an opposing gym, I think people love watching him just because he plays with such a passion and plays so hard, and he plays with a joy. And our guys just love him.
When he gets in those heat checks, though, you got to take him out a couple times.
You got to live with some of those because he'll hit some bombs. And one thing when he was playing at Ranger Community College, so he played for Billy Gillespie. And if you can play for Billy Gillespie, you can play for anybody. And the thing Billy loved, he said, I get on him, I yell at him, and I'll look over and he's got a smile on his face. And I told Billy, I said, yeah, because he doesn't know what you're saying, Billy. So, but yeah, he just has. The way that he has, I think, morphed his game in his body. He's put on a lot of weight. The first year he really struggled with the physicality in the league. Last year you saw the progression that he made in his game, and this year he's really used to it. And he's the #1 guy, I can promise you, that people are talking about when they're playing against us on the scouting report. So, he's just, again, I love where he is. He's a hero. I mean, Steph Curry sent in tweets about him, and nothing ever phases him. He's such a level-headed kid that's going to go out and play with a passion every time he's on the floor.
You have Sam here with you, and you talked about the injuries last year, and it really put you in a position where Sam needed to play, and to say he responded, I'd say would be an understatement. He was really good, and now is an important cog in your team. What has this been like for you as a dad and as a coach to be able to coach your son who plays really meaningful minutes and is a big part of winning?
Well, I'm really proud of him, and I'll never forget. So Bandamel, we're on the road at Penn State. He goes out early in the game with a very bad knee injury, and we get on the plane, and I sat him down. I said, hey, you're a third point guard now. You got to be ready to play, and put him out there the next game. And we got beat at home by a really good Northwestern team. He had a great game. He was probably our best player that game, and then he followed it up at Maryland with 18 points. I'm like, shoot, he can play a little bit. And then he has the big steal at home against Maryland to help us win, and he had a big steal against Wisconsin late in the game. And that's really where he has an impact. He's a winning player. He doesn't put up huge numbers, but the job he did on Tyson Walker in our last game, and then Tyler Perry in the last game, and really at the end of the game, I know I can trust him. He gets the ball to the right place, and you always know what you're getting from him on the defensive end.
How about the father component?
That's what I was. Yeah.
You get so caught up in the heat of the moment, you really don't think about it. And then I guess when you go home and you're sitting around, you're watching the film. The Maryland game, for example, was really cool because both sets of grandparents were there. His sister was at that game, and that's where it kind of sinks in. This is pretty cool. The opportunity to spend time. And my wife complains. She's like, Sam, you never come home. And she'll tell him to come home. And I said, I'm kind of sick of him. I really don't need him. But yeah, it's pretty cool to have him in Lincoln.
I would ask you, do you remember back the days when you played? We were in
barely.
No, I was at Purdue. Do you remember the game?
Yeah,
Iowa State
in Hawaii.
Yes, in Hawaii, in Hilo, where it rained for 8 days.
Terrible call. Yeah, Conzo Martin.
Yeah,
Conzo Martin ran right over Derek Hayes, and it was a clear charge, and they called a block, and Conzo got the and one, and he ended up beating us on that play. Yeah, but Tim Floyd ran the refs off the floor.
Yes, he did. And it was rained for 8 straight days in Hilo.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. It was just and no little Jim, no one there.
Yeah.
But he was an unbelievable player.
That's the rainy side of the Big Island.
Yes,
right?
it is. Yes, it is.
It was going to rain.
Yeah. You go to Hawaii.
Not for 8 days straight.
Yeah. Wanted to ask you just really quickly about the league and kind of what your takeaway is. I know you've only played the 2 conference games so far, but you're a basketball junkie. You watch a ton of it.
Yeah.
Give me a sense of what you think of the Big Ten.
I think the league really had an unbelievable week. When you look at Purdue knocking off Arizona, when you saw what Michigan State did, that bounce back game to do what they did, up 30 points in the first half against Baylor on a neutral court. Really tough ending for Penn State against Georgia Tech. I thought that was a really tough break that they had at the end of that game.
You're not going to say it.
I'm not going to say what happened.
That was a bad call.
Yes, I agree. And
Yes.
then, we had the great win, obviously, against Kansas State. And then last night, the league goes 6-0 and just, manhandled the opponent. Tonight's going to be a great day of basketball for the Big Ten. I think 22-3 over the last 25. One of those was Michigan losing a double overtime, the Penn State game that we talked about. But, I think the league is in a really good place, and it's going to be very competitive. Purdue, obviously, is on a whole different level. Illinois is playing great basketball. Wisconsin, Ohio State. I mean, just across the board. And you know how it is. When you get into league play, every night's going to be a battle.
Who's the surprise team in your mind, do you think? You guys?
Minnesota. Minnesota's
yeah.
got a good team, and they are physical, and they are tough, and they are big, and they shoot it. I think Ben did a great job of addressing that need and getting guys that can come in, and we saw that firsthand. They just dominated us in that second half. And I think Minnesota's in a really good place.
They got Hawkins passing the ball now, too.
Yeah.
17 assists, 11, and 9.
Payne and Ola Joseph are handfuls.
They're a handful, and they are relentless on that glass. And if you don't hit them first, it's going to be a long night. Northwestern, I know they had the one tough game, but anytime you got Boo Buie on the floor, you're in for a tough night, and you have to be on point with everything they do, and they are so good defensively. So I think across the board, the league is it's in a really good place.
Well, we are fired up for the season ahead. We really do appreciate you coming in. I mean, again, the private plane was a little crazy to get up early this morning.
No.
But no,
always great seeing you guys.
To come by.
Happy holidays.
Really nice of you. Happy holidays to you as well. Enjoy the time with the family.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. 3 games involving Big Ten teams tonight, including one here on the Big Ten Network. We've got 24th ranked Wisconsin hosting Chicago State. Bragging rights over on FS1, plus a battle of future Big Ten foes as Maryland travels to Pauley Pavilion to take on UCLA. Want to touch with each one of those games with Bruce, and let's start with bragging rights. You know it well, Illinois, Mizzou. You had great success in this game. Just give us a sense for the scene in this one and what you're watching tonight.
It is an amazing game. It's so unique. I can't explain it. You have rivalry games. I Purdue, Indiana, K-State, Kansas. I mean, I've been through that. But this is so different. And that first time you go there, and it's half yellow and it's half orange, and I mean it's divided, and it never gets quiet because somebody's yelling at the refs or something, or
right.
It's just amazing. But even before I played in it, I went to scout. We used to be able to scout in person. I remember Coach Henson against Norm Stewart, 2 legends. People are tailgating. It's at the Checker Dome. I mean, it's like people come in and shop. For the holidays, they take 2-3 days off of work. It's like a football game, that type of atmosphere. It's just, and it's so cool. And then after, obviously, if you win, and I was fortunate the first 6 of them I won, that bus ride home was nice, and you're going home for break, and you feel good. When you lose, it's a whole different story. It's not much fun.
And Illinois has lost a number of these here recently, including last year, just getting blown out. This does not appear to be as good a Missouri team as a season ago. Illinois is really good. One quick key you're watching tonight.
I think who gets to the free throw line. I think that's really important. Both, Illinois so good at. Shannon gets to that free throw line, gets to the basket quite well, but Missouri does too. So now keep out of foul trouble for Illinois. Keep them off the free throw line. I think that's going to be huge. And then rebounding is always, Illinois is a really good rebounding team. If they can dominate the boards, that could be a difference.
And Missouri definitely more perimeter-oriented this year.
They play small ball for the most part.
Yes, they do. Wisconsin, Chicago State, the game that's on our air. We've seen what Chicago State can do after knocking off Northwestern. They've actually played really well. They've won 4 games in a row now. They went to Valpo and won. So I suppose that works maybe somewhat in Wisconsin's favor, because if you're Greg Gard, you can point to some evidence and say
it's going to help them.
Yeah,
there's no doubt, and it happens in college basketball, and that was a typical holiday game. You all of a sudden you're done with exams. Exams at Northwestern are not an easy thing.
Right.
And now to get the guys, and they got rated the whole thing. And normally we wouldn't even talk about this game probably, but Chicago State they have a group of players. And I know them well. The one that scored 31 against Northwestern, we recruited him. He was a highly recruited kid. It just happens a family member is the coach, so now he's at Chicago State. That's how he ended up there. And they have 4 of his teammates, and I coached one of their other teammates at Kansas State. So they got some players. Wisconsin, I think is really playing well after a little bit of a slow start. The additions, again, Storr, Blackwell have really, really helped them. There's no doubt. It gives them somebody with some wiggle that can make some plays when they need it, and that's what they were missing last year.
Chicago State forces a ton of turnovers. That's what they did against Northwestern, a team that doesn't turn it over much. We know Wisconsin doesn't turn it over much either. We'll see whether they can protect the ball against the Cougars. Finally, Maryland going to UCLA. You got the last game before the holiday. You're going cross country. These are two really good defensive teams, although let's just be honest. I mean, UCLA has not played well this year. That being said, this is a challenging game logistically here for Maryland.
Well, if you remember last year, Maryland, I think, was 10-0 or 9-0, and then UCLA went in there and just throttled them. So
last team to beat them.
Yeah. So it's still a big game. It's big for our league. Again, 22-3. Fred talked about it. 6-0 last night. If you can continue that, it's real important. Dante Scott made shots finally. That's a positive thing. You got Young, Reese, him going. The freshman got to take a step up. They missed those other pieces, and that's the difference between their team last year and this year.
It'll be fascinating to see how this one goes. And again, you think about this game, and it's kind of a big deal, right? I mean, going cross country and big non-conference game on your schedule. This is a Wednesday in February next year. I mean, this is going to be a conference game. It's kind of crazy to think about it and pretty exciting to think about it as well. 9 Big Ten teams getting set for postseason play. All kicks off tomorrow in Vegas. Northwestern, perhaps the nation's most unlikely bowl bid based on their offseason. They're battling Utah, Minnesota, and Rutgers in action after Christmas. After that, 6 games in 4 days. It's highlighted by 3 teams in the New Year's Six. Ohio State, Mizzou in the Cotton Bowl, Penn State, Mississippi in the Peach Bowl, and then on New Year's Day, Michigan and Alabama in Pasadena, the playoff semifinals. As promised, Anthony Herron is here. Let's run through the early games first, and then we'll get to the New Year's Six coming up to end the show. Starting with Northwestern and Utah. This is a Utah team that started the year, I think, with some fairly realistic aspirations of maybe getting to the college football playoff.
Oh, yeah, right.
They have had a ton of injuries this year. I mean, this is maybe the most snake-bitten team in the country in terms of injuries. They've had some opt-outs here as well. Northwestern, we all know the story. What do you make of this matchup here?
It's interesting that David Braun has, in some ways, tried to model his very brief time so far as the Northwestern head coach, but tries to model it a bit after Kyle Whittingham and what Whittingham has been doing at Utah. He spent some time out there as an assistant coach when he was still a defensive coordinator at the FCS level, just doing sort of some training, some team building, some studying of how Utah operates and the complementary football that Kyle Whittingham has deployed so successfully for so many years in Salt Lake City. And personnel-wise, if it were all of the top-line personnel for the Utes, then there'd be a lot to be concerned about. And I think, schematically, that's still going to be the case. Utah is a team between Whittingham and Morgan Scalley, their defensive coordinator. They play a lot of man coverage on the back end. The weaponry that Northwestern has available to them, there should be some matchups they can look to attack because, like you referenced, there's some opt-outs, some guys have hit the transfer portal. So personnel-wise, there's not going to be a big disparity. And as we saw during the regular season, even against certain opponents where it looked like maybe there'd be a personnel disparity, Northwestern was able to find ways to scheme things up, especially on defense, as they grew on that side of the ball. Really, each side of the ball grew throughout the season for the Cats. But Utah, scheme up-wise, they're going to do what they do. They're going to play man coverage. They're going to rush the quarterback with their front four. They get a little bit exotic on third downs on occasion. And Kyle Whittingham is one of the most successful bowl coaches in history. I mean, his bowl winning
until recently, though, they've lost their last 4. But there was a spot where he had won 11 of 12.
Right, and the bowls that they've been in have now upticked quite a bit in recent years. This season, not to the same extent.
Right. Northwestern has actually won 4 straight bowl games, including a bowl win over Utah a number of years back. It'll be interesting to see. Northwestern is almost completely unscathed by opt-outs and transfers. I mean, they've lost almost no one. Josh Priebe, I think, is really the only one there, an offensive lineman.
And a great opportunity for them, right? That
Yep.
seems to end up mattering in these games, how the team perceives it going in.
Right. Utah's still really good defensively, despite all the injury issues. Gophers in Bowling Green, Minnesota. You want to talk about a team that's good in bowls? Minnesota, 6 straight bowl wins. That is the longest bowl winning streak in Big Ten history. You got this game against Bowling Green. Minnesota, obviously, there's some question marks. Quarterback Ethan Kaliakmanis has left via the transfer portal. What are you expecting in this one against the Falcons team that, remember, beat them a couple years ago?
Exactly. I had Minnesota the week after that, and it wasn't a Bowling Green team at the time that anyone would have expected should have competed with Minnesota at that moment. But now we saw, just comparing the teams for this particular season, Bowling Green is a team that finished stronger down the stretch of this season than Minnesota did. There was a point just beyond the midway point where we thought Minnesota was the team in the driver's seat for the Big Ten West Division. They faltered down the stretch in the month of November. Cole Kramer, this is an opportunity at quarterback, though, between Cole Kramer, the offensive line, a run game, a backfield that should be healthier now for the Gophers, and for Cole Kramer to see if he can step in and at least, be a viable option for them as, a potential quarterback competition would likely play out entering the spring. But it's an opportunity for him, aided by a ground attack that we know they'll feature.
Yeah, they've got a good quarterback in the transfer portal as well, so that'll be a competition there next year. It'll be interesting to see them without Joe Rossi running the defense. I think that's a little bit of a variable. He, of course, left and went to Michigan State, but good, probably pretty even matchup. The way to beat Bowling Green seems to be through the air, and it's not clear whether or not that's going to be Minnesota's strong suit, but an interesting game, no doubt. How about Rutgers and Miami, the Pinstripe Bowl? This is a great reward, I think, for the Scarlet Knights, not just to be in a bowl game after what was a really nice year, but to get to do it close to home where a lot of friends and family are going to get to watch them in a great venue in Yankee Stadium against a Miami team they have never beaten in the history of their program, and a good opportunity to end that here.
And to have Kyle Monangai, be able to be there after the 1,000-yard season, led the Big Ten in rushing and getting to stay there near home. So there should be a lot of folks who just show up to watch Rutgers, to watch their star running back as well. And to have a few weeks away, I really think Gavin Wimsatt can be a guy who's benefited from a few weeks off and then some practice time with bowl preparation. I recall as a young football player especially what bowl prep ended up meaning, where you get back to some fundamentals that can be really difficult during the regular season. We saw his decisiveness and accuracy maybe falter a bit later in the year for Rutgers, and just some time in the meeting room, on the practice field. I think he in particular could really benefit from that.
And this is another one of those bowl games where one team has its starting quarterback from the whole year, the other doesn't. Yeah. Tyler Van Dyke not only went into the portal, but as we know, is headed to Wisconsin next year, Miami's starting QB. And again, Greg Schiano's got a lot of connection back to Miami, including connection to Mario Cristobal. This is a meaningful game for him. And 0-11 all time against the Canes. It would be great to see Rutgers get that first win ever over Miami. Wrapping things up here with Anthony Herron, but still a lot of ground to cover as we talk through the biggest bowls for the Big Ten. Let's start with the biggest one of all, the college football playoff.
Shall we?
Michigan and Alabama. I know you've been talking about it extensively on Big Ten radio. We don't have quite as much bandwidth as we do here on the radio show, but kind of the biggest things that jump out to you as you've thought about this matchup.
The stretch run for each of these teams was so unique because Michigan was so dominant early in the season. Of course, their competition was a part of that formula for them, but then they did begin to struggle a bit down the stretch, still found ways to win games over and over again. But I think the time away should really benefit Michigan, not only just to be able to prepare for Alabama, because schematically, there's going to be a bit of a Spider-Man meme deal to just the way these two teams approach things schematically, but to lick a few wounds, to get J.J. McCarthy healthy. The last time we saw Michigan's offensive line in the Big Ten championship game, it was their worst performance of the season against the talented Iowa defensive front, and Alabama certainly has talent in their front seven that they're going to be able to throw at Michigan. So I think to be able to have a little bit of time away and make sure that how Michigan attacks things offensively, that really stands out to me. I think back to a couple of seasons ago when Michigan faced Georgia in the college football playoff, and I really felt like, the final score of that game, a lot of folks felt like there was this big personnel advantage for Georgia. I just thought Michigan's game plan wasn't aggressive enough. They were able to get behind that Georgia secondary and didn't take advantage of it. This Alabama defense has exceptional DBs, but I would like to see Michigan will need to keep things relatively confined, but make sure you scheme things up with J.J. McCarthy using his multidimensional skills, not only him as a runner, but try to scheme up some shot plays. See if you can at least set that up to lengthen the coverage, because you do need to find ways to lighten the box against this Crimson Tide defense. We know Michigan's ground attack hasn't been as dominant throughout the season, but Alabama, they have given up some rushing yards. The defense overall, most of the talent, I would say D-line and back end, find a way to soften the middle with Colston Loveland.
It's interesting. Auburn ran all over them, and then Georgia couldn't run the ball at all on them. So the last two performances, kind of hard to know what you're going to see with Alabama. It's interesting to me that the narrative seems to be so much in favor of Alabama. And I think a big part of the reason it feels like nationally people are looking at it that way, part of it is Saban and his incredible success in the postseason and having extra time to prepare. But I think the other part is Jalen Milroe, how much better that he has gotten this year, and this notion that Michigan hasn't seen a quarterback like him. So you were talking a little bit about Michigan on the offensive side. What about when Alabama has the ball?
Alabama is going to be aggressive schematically. Now, they want to run the football. They'll be healthier in the backfield going into the college football playoff than they were. But Jalen Milroe, he does throw an effective deep ball. He's kind of like J.J. McCarthy of a year or two ago, where the precision isn't there yet, but you see the mobility and athleticism. That's a part of their game plan. But the deep ball, the strike play is how they like to attack. We know how talented Michigan is on the back end, though, and they can. We've seen how Jesse Minter can scheme up the blitz package. I think when they can rush with four, that'll be key. I really think the four-man rush, the front rush of Michigan has been a bit up and down this season. But if they can still keep Jalen Milroe, at least just move him off the spot and get him out of rhythm when they're not blitzing, that'll give them the best opportunity because there are some athletes on the outside for the Tide. If you count on Milroe to just make mistakes, that may not be the case, but force him into some unforced errors because on the whole, he's protected the football pretty well. The turnover numbers aren't bad, even though the turnover-worthy plays still at times, even late in the season, have been there for Milroe. So I think Michigan's front seven, especially their D-line, how talented they are up front, they got to show up not only trying to control the run, but when they're not bringing the blitz, they got to find ways to rush the passer up front.
And again, I think there might be a little bit of a misconception from Big Ten fans who haven't watched Jalen Milroe a lot. I mean, they're sixth in the nation in passing efficiency, Alabama, without the kind of superstars that we normally associate with them having on the flank. So he's pretty good. I mean, he's become a very good quarterback.
I would say real quick, just in comparison, where it feels like they're even in most spots, comparing quarterback to quarterback, advantage J.J. McCarthy. That's where, to me, I would say where Michigan can really have an edge there if J.J. plays like early season J.J.
Right. I mean, again, he's incredibly efficient as well and the second most accurate passer in the country. What about Ohio State and Missouri in the Cotton Bowl? We've been talking about this quite a bit, just kind of in the context of this is the capping of a great year for Missouri. You know that they're thrilled to be there. They've got some skill position talent that is truly outstanding. And then you wonder a little bit about the motivation for Ohio State. Does that concern you at all, that angle on it?
It would concern me for programs that don't have the competitive depth that the Buckeyes do. Think back to the Rose Bowl a couple of years ago where there was kind of a similar vibe. You go in facing Utah, a team that was very pleased to be there, had some opt-outs at wide receiver and on defense. So you wonder what Ohio State will show up. And then not only does C.J. Stroud put on, continue and sort of build off of what we'd seen from him that regular season, but you get a historic performance from Jackson Smith-Njigba and Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm not going to sit here and predict which skill position players for the Buckeyes will be out there at receiver and at running back. I still think that's likely an unanswered question. But Devin Brown, this opportunity for him where the assumption was going into the recruiting cycle that, okay, they're going to go find some veteran QB in the portal and bring them in. That hasn't happened yet. And Devin Brown, at least on social media, has sort of, exuded a level of confidence and competitiveness. I would say by comparison, I mentioned J.J. McCarthy earlier, where when J.J. McCarthy was a young football player in his true freshman season, we saw at least some wow moments. We didn't see as much wow from Devin Brown in his limited opportunities that I thought we would this season. Now this stage provides that opportunity. So from a motivation perspective, there's young receivers always in the fold in Columbus that are waiting for an opportunity like this. And we know at quarterback, Devin Brown, this will be the biggest stage, the biggest full game opportunity for him to showcase what he can be for Ohio State moving forward.
I'm with you. I'm fascinated to see who plays for Ohio State. I mean, does Marvin Harrison Jr. play in this game? Does Travion Henderson play in this game? But I do think it's a really cool opportunity for Devin Brown. And don't underestimate how important it is to those guys heading into next year to kind of stake their claim.
And his teammates have kind of addressed that a bit here, too. They're excited for him.
Let's talk quickly about Penn State before we wrap things up. I think this is a really interesting game against Ole Miss. Similar to Ohio State in that we really haven't had many public opt-outs at all. I mean, Chop Robinson is the only one. Ole Miss is very dynamic offensively. Penn State is outstanding, as we know, defensively, but have lost their defensive coordinator. What do you make of this matchup?
I guess that's the unfortunate aspect of it, because this matchup really does excite me. That Ole Miss offense against this Penn State defense, especially the aggression that they can overwhelm you within that front seven and how they like to go some man coverage on the back end. So that'll still be there, but it'll be there without Manny Diaz. So what exactly does that do to impact that additional fury and the situational awareness that Penn State has been effective at accompanying all the aggression and the schematic sort of wizardry that they have in there? We'll see a blitz package, but you don't have the main play caller who'll still be in place. But personnel-wise, that to me is the key, like you highlight there. How do the guys up front get after things, really pressure Ole Miss's offense? Because Lane Kiffin, he's as effective as any play caller in the country, just dialing up matchups and calling his team into some aggression, even if they're not necessarily on their game early. He finds a way to find another gear for them schematically.
Has a really good quarterback as well in Jackson Dart. What about when Penn State has the ball?
I like this matchup for me with Drew Aller, especially because of how we saw he finished the season. And my hope is that, again, another coordinator who's no longer there, but to have Drew Aller showcase the full arsenal of his skills that he began to showcase, especially with the deep ball, take some of those shot plays.
And an Ole Miss team that's been vulnerable this year defensively, 10th in the SEC in total defense. This was a ton of fun.
Yes.
Have great holidays, my friend.
my
Happy holidays to all of you who watch Big Ten today. See you for Media Day from the Rose Bowl a week from tomorrow.